Hi everyone, it's Peyton from Rackets and Runners.
And it's Luca from Rackets and Runners.
And today we're going to be introducing a new brand that we're bringing into the store. You might have heard of them before, but it's called Altra. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the shoe, and then we're also going to talk about how it fits into the shoe industry as a whole and what demographic it works best for. Altra started off as a brand for people who prefer a more minimalist style shoe while they're running, but find that they need a little bit more cushioning in addition to that wider toe box to help protect their feet against higher impact with pavement, and so that they can keep on running but still receive all of the benefits of a minimalist shoe. Now, before we dive into the shoe specifically, we should talk a little bit about what exactly a minimalist shoe is. Typically, a minimalist or a barefoot shoe is a shoe that has a 0 mm heel drop. What that means is that when you're walking, your heel is 0 millimeters above where your toes are. The other thing that barefoot or minimalist shoes do is that they have a much wider toe box in the front of the shoe. As you can see here, the shoe is actually foot shaped as opposed to the almond shape that a lot of running shoes are. What this does is it lets your toes spread out properly and more naturally, so we can run with a bit more of a natural gait.
Now, Altra definitely made their name with barefoot, more minimalist shoes, but recently, in the last several years, they have started making some more traditional style of offerings, like the shoes that we've got here. For example, the Forward Via, and what shoe do you have there, Peyton?
The shoe I have is the Experience Flow 2.
So these are the shoes that we decided to bring into the store, and they are a little bit more traditional. For example, this one has a 4 mm drop. I believe that one does as well. So we're going to get into these two specific models a little bit more now. So Peyton, talk to us a little bit about your experience with the Experience Flow 2.
Yeah, so I've been very pleased with my experience so far. Initially, upon putting the shoe in, I did really notice the extra room in the toe box. It was almost weird how my feet were actually able to kind of splay out a little bit more naturally than be kind of pressed together. When I wore it as an everyday shoe, I found it to be really comfortable. Sometimes when you put a shoe on and then at the end of the day your feet are almost kind of throbbing because they've swollen and the shoe doesn't have much give. In these, I didn't notice that at all. The toe box was really comfortable. Fit wise, I did find the shoe to be a little bit shallow volume wise, especially in the front of the shoe. A lot of running shoes, while they have a little bit more of an almond shape to them rather than this actual foot shape, they tend to compensate for that with having a deeper toe box and more volume in the front. Whereas this one, because it has the wider toe box, they do need to make it a bit shallower so it hugs your foot a bit better. So I did notice it was a shallower fit. It wasn't too shallow, but something to note if you have orthotics or something. And then it grabbed the heel very nicely.
That was a really similar experience for me. I think the fit on both these shoes is quite similar, where this one, the Forward Via, is really wide in the toe box, and I have a very wide forefoot, and I felt that ability for my toes to splay quite a bit, way more than most other shoes. The other thing that kind of stands out with this shoe is that it almost feels a little bit short because it is so squared off here. You almost want you almost feel like you want the shoe to have a little bit more of a peak. But once you get used to this fit, it's actually really nice because there is less shoe there. So it does feel almost a little bit more nimble, a little bit more barefoot-like. Now, the fit in the rest of the shoe was very good, especially in the heel. The heel is a little bit lower, but for me, it grabbed onto my heel very, very well. And if you do have any problems with heel slippage, there is another eyelet in there that you can just lace the laces through. That should be totally fine. But honestly, even though it is a little bit lower cut back there, I had really, really good heel hold, which can be a problem for me sometimes. The only part of the shoe that wasn't really snug, I would say, would be the midfoot. It was a little bit loose in there. I didn't get much slippage, but you could just feel there was a little bit of extra space. You can always tie the laces a little bit tighter. It's never going to be the snuggest shoe there, but yeah, overall, the fit is very comfortable, but also quite precise, which was really nice. Now, just commenting on what Peyton said about the toe box being a little bit shallow, I do have quite a high instep, and I had a similar experience. It's not necessarily uncomfortable, but you feel the upper is there. So if you do have a really high instep, I would suggest at least trying on the shoe before you buy it. but again, it is a mesh upper, so it will break in over time. It's not necessarily the softest mesh material, which is why I would say you want this shoe to fit you pretty well out of the box. But yeah, that instep is a little bit low, so just something to keep in mind. So I think our experience with the fit was quite similar. These shoes do have a similar fit. Now we're going to talk about the cushioning and the ride. But first, we're going to read off the specs of these two shoes because that is kind of where the differences in cushioning and ride originate from in terms of stack height, weight, all that good stuff.
So the Experience Flow 2 again has that 4mm heel drop. The forefoot of the shoe has a stack height of 26mm, and the heel of the shoe has a stack height of 30mm.
Now the forward Via is more of a maximalist shoe. This still has a 4mm heel to toe drop, but it's 33mm tall in the forefoot and 37mm tall in the heel. That does mean it's not necessarily the tallest maximalist shoe, but this is the tallest shoe in Altra's range. Then the midsole is actually made from a nitrogen-infused supercritical foam, so a little bit different to the Experience Flow there. This is Altra's EGO Flow foam. So you can tell just from those specs, definitely a more standard style of runner and a more maximalist style of runner. So now let's get into the ride because that's where these differ the most.
Yeah, so the feel of the Experience Flow 2 when I put it on, super nice compared to a lot of the other running shoes I run in. It is a lot more flexible on the bottom, which I quite enjoyed. I definitely felt like the muscles of my feet were working differently. So when I was running, I could really notice, I could feel like the flex of my foot while I was running, which was really nice. It definitely felt like a more natural way of running. Cushioning wise while I was running, I would say this is a very standard feeling cushioning. It did the job, protected my feet. I wouldn't say it's the most responsive cushioning, but this is a really good shoe for like an easy run or an everyday shoe. I found it to be very comfortable.
Now compared to other maximalist shoes, this is a little bit different on foot. I would say the forefoot is firmer than average. You definitely feel like there's cushioning and stack height there, but instead of it being like a plush pillowy sensation, it's kind of firm, but it does obviously still soak up the ground. Then the heel is actually quite plush. I was getting a lot of squish back there when I was really digging my heel in, so that's nice, but definitely a firmer push off in the forefoot. So just keep that in mind. The cushioning isn't pillowy, so if you need that, it's probably best to avoid these, but if you do like that firmer push off, this is fantastic. And you definitely feel that supercritical foam in there. You get a little bit more of that punch and energy return on toe off, so it's really nice. Now another thing that I actually really enjoyed with these shoes is this cut in the forefoot. Now, like I was saying with the fit, it almost feels like it's short, and when you're actually moving with it, it does feel not more aerodynamic, but it feels like you're lugging around less shoe in the same size, if that makes sense. Like it was a very responsive toe off, where it almost felt like my toe was a little bit lighter, which I really enjoyed. And compared to other maximalist shoes, which can be definitely a little bit clunkier, that combination of the firmer, responsive, supercritical foam with this almost like barefoot aerodynamic feel in the toe was really surprising and really quick.
So let's get in a little bit about who these shoes would be a good fit for. If you are interested in trying out a more minimalist style shoe, but are a little hesitant to fully commit to the zero drop, no cushioning style, these would be a great shoe for that. Or if you're wanting to transition to that, but maybe your feet aren't very happy with that and it's too abrupt, this would be a good middle ground shoe to prepare your feet for that next step. Running wise, if you find that all of the more almond shaped shoes just really don't jive with the way your foot feels while you run, this would also be a really great option for you because of the way the toe box is shaped. For those of you who are experiencing foot issues like plantar fasciitis and have kind of been prescribed if you've been prescribed a Hoka or a Ghost Max 2, I would shy away from these shoes just because those shoes are very stiff, high stack height and rocker bottomed shoes that almost essentially splint your foot, whereas especially the Experience Flow 2 is very flexible, so your feet are going to be flexing and may aggravate some of those issues that you're dealing with. If you're just getting into running and you like the idea of that wider toe box, again, these are super comfortable and a good middle ground shoe where it's halfway between that minimalist shoe and that more traditional style running shoe that a lot of people really enjoy, and I find them to be really comfortable. My experience after running them a couple times, I will say, because I wear such typically pretty stiff runners when I run as with high stack heights, this was a pretty big change for me when I started running in these. Again, they are super flexible. I did notice that my feet were not hurting, but they were sore after the first couple times I ran with these, just because the muscles in my feet were actually actually working and were working pretty differently than when they do in a more traditional runner. So this would also be a really good shoe to supplement in your shoe rotation if you do have one while you're running, especially for like your easier or your recovery runs, just because there is merit to having your foot work different ways in different shoes, and nothing is going to work so differently than the rest of the shoes in your rotation than this. So it will really help build up the muscles in your feet when you wear them.
Now the Forward Via is kind of a weird shoe to recommend because it has that ultra barefoot DNA to it, but then it's also a maximalist shoe. So it's kind of like a clash of two identities almost, but it works really, really well in this shoe. If you do want that high stack maximalist feel from your shoe, but then you also want, you know, what she was just talking about, your feet working a little bit more with that barefoot DNA of the Ultra style, then it's a really good shoe and it's kind of unique on the market. So that's who I would recommend it for. And then just in terms of distances, obviously this is a maximalist shoe, so it's more going to be for long runs, recovery runs. It's not necessarily going to be for high pace stuff, but yeah, any day that you're going to kind of extend the run and you want something comfortable underfoot, but that also has a nice responsive push off, this is kind of the perfect shoe for that. And of course, for those of you who have been running in barefoot stylish shoes, but maybe you've developed some sort of injury, whether it be plantar fasciitis or whatever other injury, these would be probably my primary recommendation right now, just because they are more maximalist, they're a little bit stiffer. They're going to help your foot out quite a bit more than a classic barefoot shoe, but they still have that barefoot DNA to them.
I just wanted to do a quick honorable mention for another Ultra that we've brought into the store. It is the trail running twin sister of the Experience Flow 2, the Wild Flow 2. Same specs, same drop height, except that they have the more trail running geared lugs at the bottom of the shoe, so you can get better grip on the trails and still get that barefoot feel. And yeah, they're, again, very similar to these, super comfortable. It has been a great hit so far with members of our run club. All right, so that's the end of the video. If you want to give these Ultra shoes a try, come visit us in store or check us out online at racketsandrunners.ca.